Good afternoon. I'm Robert Pondiscio, a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. There has been a growing conversation in education among teachers, curriculum designers, and increasingly the broader culture about a quiet but consequential shift. Students are reading fewer whole books in school. Not fewer hard books, not fewer demanding books, just fewer books. You see it in college professors noting that students struggle to finish assigned texts. You see it in K-12 classrooms where novels and plays have, in many cases, been replaced by shorter passages, excerpts, and skill-focused reading tasks. Now, some of that shift was well-intentioned. The accountability era placed a premium on measurable skills, and shorter texts are easier to standardize, to assess, and to align to curriculum. But something may have been lost in the process. Because reading a book is not just an extended version of reading a passage, it requires different habits, sustained attention, memory, the ability to follow ideas and narratives over time. And perhaps most importantly, it's how we enter into a shared intellectual and cultural world. So there's a growing consensus, at least in principle, that we should return to teaching whole books. But that raises a harder question, the one we're here to discuss today. How? What does it actually look like to teach a whole book well? Not just assign it, but teach it in a way that ensures students are reading, understanding, and engaging deeply with the text. To explore that question this afternoon, I'm joined by three terrific guests. Mike Austin is the Upper School Director of Curriculum at Great Hearts Academies. Prior to this position, he taught geometry and humane letters and served as Dean of Academics at Veritas Prep, a Great Hearts charter school in Phoenix, Arizona. Kyair Butts is a middle school English teacher and debate coach at Henderson Hopkins Partnership School in Baltimore, and a training facilitator for Great Minds Wit and Wisdom curriculum. He was recognized in 2019 as Teacher of the Year in Baltimore City Public Schools. And Doug Lemov, the founder of Uncommon Schools and author of Teach Like a Champion and Reading Reconsidered. Doug's work has been enormously influential in shaping how educators think about reading instruction, not just what students read, but how we teach them to read closely, attentively, and with purpose. Doug's latest book is out of focus. His latest book is Teach Like a Champion Guide to the Science of Reading, written with his longtime colleagues and collaborators, Colleen Driggs and Erica Wolway. It's one of the rare books that bridges the persistent gap between research and classroom practice, translating cognitive science into concrete, observable moves that teachers can use immediately without losing sight of the complexity of reading itself. We'll begin with a brief demonstration or presentation from Doug, and then move into a moderated discussion that focuses on what this looks like in real classrooms, including how this work plays out in very different school contexts. And we'll close by taking your questions. You can submit those questions to my colleague, Annika.Hernandez. Her email address is in the brief for this event. It's Annika.Hernandez at aei.org. You can also submit your questions on X with hashtag AEI Whole Books. So thanks again for being here. Doug, let me turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Robert. And I will try to keep it brief here. And you can, I don't know if there's some way via Zoom that you can drag me off stage or something when you need to, but it will be tricky because this is such an important topic and there's so much to say about it. My introductory image here just suggests that I may be preaching to the choir. I suspect we're a group of people who all believe in books. But I do want to make a brief defense of the book and talk a little bit about why books are so important for students to read, especially given that they're disappearing. And the first thing is that cognitive scientists find that stories are cognitively privileged or psychologically privileged. They sometimes use that term, and that refers to the idea that we're wired to take information from stories, to use information from stories, to listen well to stories. This is some detail from an article that Daniel Willingham, the University of Virginia cognitive psychologist, wrote in 2004. So he's citing another researcher's work, but students remember about 50% more from stories than from expository passages. Story structure, he says, naturally leads the listener or reader to make inferences that are neither terribly easy nor impossibly difficult. This is important because the brain likes challenge. It doesn't like to be bored. It doesn't like to be insulted, but it doesn't like challenges to be so hard that it shuts down. And so a story with the manageable, what they call medium level inferences that are implicit in writing, engage the mind especially well. And the familiarity of structure, the idea that we've heard 10,000 stories. So when we encounter information in the form of a story, we don't have to think about the external structure of the information, the extraneous cognitive load. We can just think about the content easily because we're so familiar with the structure that it comes to us in. So the idea here is that stories are cognitively privileged. We remember more, we connect to more, we're interested in the information that we get in stories. So if we want some students to learn something, it's a great way to present information to them. A second argument, you could argue that, well, we could just give students short stories then. Why books? Why is that an argument for books? But long form stories are especially optimal, and I would just argue that they're especially optimal now. One thing that a long form story does that a book does is it teaches cognitive persistence, which is the ability to sustain focus and to reserve judgment. And in fact, not only do they teach persistence, but they reward persistence. I was reading a book recently that a colleague recommended to me, and I read about 40 pages of it, and I'll be honest, I was struggling with it. I couldn't get into the book, and I was doing this thing that I sometimes do where I'm like, I'm on page 40, I'm on page 42, I'm kind of counting my way to the end of the book. I'm on page 48, and then suddenly I was on page 150, and then suddenly I was on page 225. It takes time and work to enter a book, right? And that's actually important for students to achieve that persistence. They live in a world of instant gratification. But the book teaches you that if you persist and you struggle, you are rewarded with a depth of thought and insight that you don't get through any other medium. And so at the end of this book that I'd struggled to start with, I was so grateful that I'd read it. And this just reminds us this idea that so much of communication is short form, increasingly short, and shorter form communication. There are costs to that. Marshall McLuhan, the 20th century sociologist, is famous for the phrase, the medium is the message, right? And the message of the medium of social media, which is how students get, spend so much of their time and get so much of their information, is that 128 characters is pretty sufficient to wrestle with most with most concepts in the world, and you can pretty much you can express your opinion on this complex issue in 128 characters. Your hot take is probably right. No sense reflecting on that any further or any deeper. But one of the interesting things about a book is that the protagonist never believes at the end what he or she believed at the beginning. It's the process of long-form thought development and understanding the depth and complexity of issues, everyday issues, broader issues, all of the above. And so long-form stories are especially optimal. The other thing that cognitive scientists say about books is they are the closest possible analog to our own thinking processes. Raymond Marr is a cognitive scientist. He describes close parallels between narrative structure and how we actually communicate internally our own experiences to ourselves. It's a series of temporally ordered, this is his language, temporally ordered causal events organized around personal goals that mimics the way that we think about our own world. So if we want to cause students to understand how other people think, this book, which mimics their own thinking as a close proxy to their own thinking processes, is ideal. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is a quote from Annie Murphy Paul. She just points out that there's a lot of research that when you experience something emotionally in a book, the amplitude of the measurement is different, but the same brain regions are fired whether you're experiencing it in a book or in real life. In other words, she says the brain doesn't make much of a distinction between reading about an experience and encountering it in real life. The same neural regions are firing. This is why very few other forms of media can cause you to have the intensity of emotion that a book can cause you to weep, and very few other forms of media can do that to you. I think one other thing about books is that books transport, I was mentioning that the closest possible analog to our own thinking, they transport the thinking of people in the past into the present. And that's actually really important because, should students read books with diverse viewpoints? Absolutely. Is it important to understand how from people from different backgrounds and different perspectives think about things? Of course. And one of the most important forms of diversity is the voices of the past. Just think for a minute about how little the average student knows about some of the mundane aspects of the past. That if you lived in the 19th century You were tied to place. You probably hadn't traveled more than 20 miles from your home. In fact, 90, almost everybody you knew had never traveled more than 20 miles from your home. And so, that shaped your worldview. And maybe the only way you can experience that is by reading in the book. Or the familiarity of, like if you grew up in the 18th century, you're just as likely grew up in a family that had 10 kids and 6 of them had died, and that, that people were familiar with death and went stoically on with their lives. There are all sorts of ways that people thought, often in very mundane, everyday ways that are so important for us to not think about the world through a simplistic presentist lens. And so that's an argument in favor of books. One last argument I just say, books are a storehouse of the most important thoughts that we have accumulated as societies. And not only does it allow me to engage those thoughts, but it allows me to engage other people in conversations about those thoughts. The world is full of allusions to great books. And if you haven't had the blessing of experiencing those, you're cast out of those conversations and people judge you for it. One of my favorite books is Ron Suskind's book, A Hope in the Unseen, about a student from Anacostia High School in DC who goes to Brown University. And there's this beautiful scene in the book, or well, powerful scene in the book, where he's walking through the bookstore at Brown and he sees these names, Monet, Marx, Dickens, that he knows they're important, but he doesn't know who they are and why they're important. And so he's not able to have conversations with people about them. So I have a line here just on my screen, which is, I was reading George Orwell's, one of his first novel. It's about his life in Burma, Burmese days. And he says, this is his description of a character: to hear what was said of him, anyone would have imagined the doctor a compound of Machiavelli, Sweeney Todd, and the Marquis de Sade. Right? It's just a great sentence to allude to the way, to demonstrate the way that illusions, which are a form of cultural capital, are all around us. And when we give students books, we give them access to that conversation. So books, I think, are profoundly important. Again, I think that I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I thought I'd just say a few other things about how to read a book, because I think one of the things that argues that we should recenter books into our classrooms. But there's some other things to know from the science of reading that I think are really critical. I'm just going to share a simple story with you. Robert, you're a baseball guy, right? Do I have that right?
You do indeed.
Okay, great. So here's a little story for you, Robert. I'm just going to ask you to tell me who you think is primarily at fault in this story. Here's my little story. It's
At fault.
yeah. Who's at fault? Who's more at fault? There are two characters here. We've got Thomas and we've got Carlson, and I'll just ask you to tell me who you think is more at fault. It's tied in the 8th when Thomas throws 4 straight balls to the number 9 hitter, Jeffries. Carlson's face is expressionless. He signals to the bullpen from the dugout, stung past him to the showers without so much as a nod. Okay, Robert, go ahead.
What's the score of the game, Doug? Tied.
It's tied in the 8th, yeah.
Thomas is not doing well here. If you're throwing 4 straight balls, that's a walk. You just put a man on first base. The number 9 hitter is typically the worst hitter. Often the pitcher the opposing pitcher that you've just put on base. That is not that should be an easy out. That's not a guy you're putting on base. So
it's a huge mistake to throw 4 balls to the number 9 hitter. That's great. I'm just going to keep going in a second, but I just want to point out for anyone on the call who's not a baseball person, were all these inferences that Robert just made about the number 9 hitter and 4 straight balls was that obvious to you? Like, you are probably a great reader. But when you don't have background knowledge about the thing that you're reading about, suddenly the story is a lot richer for Robert than the rest of us, than the rest of you who are not baseball people, who are like, wait, who's Thomas? What's even the idea that Carlson is obviously, to you, you made an inference there, Robert, without even knowing you made it. Carlson is obviously the manager. And to a lot of people on the call, that probably is not obvious at all. Keep going, just add a couple more details of what you noticed in this story.
Well, I mean, you can paint a picture of Carlson being a bad guy here if he's the manager, because it says that Thomas is a rookie, which means he's a young, inexperienced pitcher.
Give the kid a break.
Was that what?
Give the kid a break.
Yeah, exactly. He's not being reassuring. He's just like, get out of here, kid. So you could make the case, applying teacher language to it, that he is not being very supportive of his young pitcher.
Yeah, beautiful. You made a series of like really insightful inferences about that story, so well done to you, Robert. And there are probably some people on the call who right now who are like, huh? Right? Like, did you know, for example, if you don't know a lot of background about baseball, you might not know that like in baseball, you always walk out to the mound to pull a guy from the um,
Yeah.
to pull a pitcher from the game, right? You slap him on the back and you say, "Good job, son. Tough break, son. You'll get him tomorrow. Go take a shower."
Yep.
To pull the pitcher from the dugout, right? This is an insult.
Oh,
So
I didn't
you
catch that. Yeah.
Oh, well, see, even there. So this is fascinating, which is like when you describe some people are capable of having a really sophisticated conversation and to make insights and have higher order thoughts about this story, and other people would be struggling just to figure out, wait, what exactly happened and who is who, and it has nothing to do with how good a reader you are.
Yeah.
It has to do with how much you know about baseball. And I think this summarizes one of the most important studies that has been done about reading and is done by Recht and Less is actually called the baseball study. And they did a version of what I just did to you. They had a group of high readers and a group of low readers in the classroom, and they gave them a story to read about baseball. And half the kids in the room knew a lot about baseball, and half the kids didn't know anything about baseball. So now we've got four groups. We've got high reading ability and high knowledge of baseball. We've got low reading ability and high knowledge about baseball. We've got high reading ability. I'm confusing my groups. You can see the groups on the screen. we've got all four. There's low reading ability and low knowledge. Some things happened when they asked students questions about the passage that are pretty obvious. The high reading ability and high knowledge kids did great. They got almost all the questions right. And the low reading ability and low knowledge kids really struggled. They got like 40% of the questions right, just above guessing it's a multiple choice question. It was a disaster for them. In the middle, though, it's really fascinating. The kids who had low reading ability but high knowledge of baseball dramatically outperformed kids who had high reading ability and low knowledge of baseball, right? In fact, it's the biggest difference by far on the graph. If you look at it here, like really, this is a graph of two groups, high knowledge of baseball and low knowledge of baseball, for all the reasons that we just discovered in you reading that passage, which is when you have background knowledge about the thing that you're reading about, you naturally make inferences. And when you don't, it's really hard to make them because you don't know, you can't fill in the gaps with the things that the author implied. Daniel Willingham makes this point that data from the last 30 years lead to a conclusion that is not scientifically challengeable. Thinking well requires knowing facts. The very processes that teachers care about most, critical thinking processes like reasoning and problem solving, which you did beautifully, Robert, are intimately intertwined with factual knowledge that is in long-term memory, right? So insight, higher order thinking is domain specific and it's triggered by background knowledge. There is no transferable skill of inferencing, right? And this is hugely important because there is a myth among American educators. This is a picture of American educators here, dreaming the dream of transferable skills. It's a beautiful, beautiful dream. That's why there are dolphins in that picture. Because let's just close our eyes for a minute. Just imagine that I could teach you the skill of making an inference. I could describe to you what an inference is. An inference is reading between the lines and understanding the things that the author left unsaid, that the author left unsaid, and that maybe we could practice making inferences for an hour or two. Keep your eyes closed. This is a beautiful, beautiful dream. And then suddenly you would be able to make an inference anytime you read anything in any text for the rest of your lives. No wonder we believe it. It's a beautiful dream. But it's totally at odds with the science of reading. And this is what most English teachers believe. This is how most English curricula are structured in the US, which is it's built around the 7 steps to finding the main idea. And we read one paragraph in the entire class and we discuss how we can find the main idea of that passage. And the corollary of that is when you believe that reading is a skill, a transferable skill, that I can train you to do and apply in any setting, then suddenly it doesn't matter what you read because the purpose is the skill. And so now I might as well just give you a passage that's designed to let you ask lots of really juicy main idea questions, and then you can apply it and you can find the main idea of Charles Dickens when you read that next week. But of course, it doesn't work that way. So we need to understand the importance of background knowledge and that higher order thinking in response to a text is not a transferable skill. One other thing that is dramatically overlooked that's really important in reading classrooms is the profound importance of fluency and disfluency. And fluency is the ability to read at the speed of sight, to read words automatically, accurately, and with prosody, with expression like they would sound if they were spoken aloud. And reading fluency, this is a study from Lucia Bagazzi and her colleagues, reading fluency, this was done with middle school students, predicted all school marks in all literacy-based subjects, with reading rapidity being the most important predictor. School level did not moderate the relationship between reading fluency and school outcomes, confirming the importance of effortless and automatized higher school levels. This is fascinating because no one gets their fluency tested beyond second or third grade, but in fact, it's whether you can read at the speed of sight, fluently, smoothly, easily, with complex texts, is the single biggest predictor of how much understanding you will make from a text. You're trying to figure out what the words say. Your working memory, you have no working memory left over to have keen insights about who is at fault, the manager or the pitcher. Here's another study, 227 6th and 7th grade students. Oral reading fluency explained between 50 and 62% of the difference in reading comprehension. If I know how fluently you read, I can predict half to 2/3 of how well you'll understand a text. This is fascinating. I called, this is David Page. I called him because I was like, this is amazing. What's the percentage of disfluent students? This is 6th and 7th grade students. What's the percentage of disfluent students in American schools? And he said, nobody knows. What? How can nobody know that? But we looked at the data tables in a big study, and he said, okay, I'm going to take a wild guess here. Don't hold me to this. Don't put this in a slide, but I did put it in a slide. At the end of the day, he said, my hunch is that 40 to 50% of middle school students do not have proper reading fluency. And in schools where students generally struggle with academic attainment, this percentage is closer to 80%. There is a disfluency epidemic that is increasing as students read less outside of school, and that constantly disrupts meaning making and comprehension for students. Last key thing that I think is really important for people to understand now in reading. Here's another recent development in reading technology. This is the first form of printed writing. I think this is called cuneiform. It's one of the very first texts that archaeologists have ever found. It's 5,000 years old, which I'm actually not kidding about a recent development. That's really new from a cognitive standpoint, because we've been reading, some of us, actually only a small number of us, for about 5,000 years, but we've been speaking for 200,000 years. Maybe a lot of cognitive scientists think it's more, like 400,000 years even. So this is fascinating. We've had 400,000 years to adapt our brains to speaking. There are parts of our brains that are specialized in speech, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and the result of this is that a baby left untutored, exposed to people speaking around him or her, will learn to speak. English, Chinese, whatever's around them, they will learn it. The brain has parts of it that are designed for speech, replication, and recognition, and production. We have had no time to do that for reading. And so when we read, we are always rewiring parts of our brain that are built for some other process and putting them in service of reading. And so what this tells us is that the way that we read, since we're rewiring our brain for reading, shapes the way that we will read. If we read like my son did when I caused him to have to read for 45 minutes a day, 3 times a week, with his cell phone on his chest, lying on his back on the couch, bzz, dude, what's up? Bzz, hey, coming over? Bzz, dude, peep this video. You learn to read in a constant state of distraction and half attention. But if you read for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes straight at a time with deep concentration and focus, or maybe with other people around you who are, and you're laughing and you're gasping together at the text, and so it's an emotionally rich experience for you. How you fire is how you wire. That's what reading becomes to you. The way that you do read becomes the way that you can and will read. And so the first thing for us to attend to in reading classrooms, if we want to build up students' capacity to read, is their attention. Their attention is being fractured outside the classroom. Can we recenter the text, bring the text into the classroom, and cause students to read in a way that makes reading meaningful and powerful and harvest their attention? So I've made the case for reading books. I've talked a little bit about the science. I just want to outline 4 key ideas that I think are really important, and then I'm going to show you a video, and we'll just talk briefly about it because I think it's a beautiful video. We want students to read in a knowledge-rich environment, and maybe I'll have time to talk a little bit how we can do that. But much better than teaching skills would be to give students background knowledge about the book that they're reading so they understand it more. And then I should be attentive to attention. I should build their capacity to focus deeply on text for a sustained period of time. And I should let them read a lot, and that should include having them read aloud together in a shared setting to create connection through books, but also to give students lots of fluency practice, because fluency is really important. And then I should try and build a writing intensive environment around books. And sadly, I'll have no time to get to that for sure in this presentation. So I would actually love to show you a video. And Kyair and Michael, after I show, I might stop a couple times in the video and just talk a little bit about some things that are in the video. But I would love to hear what you guys see also before we have our conversation about it. So this is Maggie Johnson. She's an 8th grade teacher in Troy, New York. She's reading To Kill a Mockingbird with her students. And I think you'll see her attending to doing some of the things that we talked about, and probably some things that we haven't talked about. So I think it's a really beautiful video, and really I just have to find it here on my computer. There we go. I'm gonna just play it. I might pause a couple times early in the video, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, gentlemen. So Robert, can you see that okay on your screen?
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful. Here we go. Here's Maggie.
That's what I've been told. Jem looked out of the corners of his eyes. His voice rose uncontrollably. Arshay.
Atticus, what's the matter?
You can give me a little more than that, Arshay.
Atticus, what's the matter? Atticus crossed his knees and folded his arms.
I just want to pause. I think it's such a beautiful moment, right? She encourages Arshay to read with a little bit more expression. He's reading with more prosody. He's creating more meaning in the text, and reading with better fluency. He's building his fluency skills. But as he does so, there's this beautiful moment where not only Maggie laughs and the whole class laughs with them. What a signal of like approval and belonging and connection. They're like, you did a great job. We loved it when you read it like that. Keep going, right? So there's this beautiful social connection that you can see starting to grow by having students read the book together.
I'm trying to tell you the facts of life. Jim discussed
Arshay's crushing it here, obviously.
deep in. I know all of that stuff. He said,
Brianna.
Oh, he said, Atticus suddenly grow serious.
Not grow serious, it's... Say it again.
Atticus suddenly grew serious.
I just want to pause. Like, this student is not as good a reader yet as Arshay, so she needs lots of practice. So it's really important that she read loud to build her fluency, because you can almost hear the barrier of fluency there. And so making it psychologically safe for her to read aloud and giving her lots of practice reading aloud is really important. As she reads, that's the same beautiful laugh from Maggie. She encourages her, so she knows that she got it right. So now she feels successful. She reads out loud. She's part of the team. And now everyone gets fluent.
And then it's a familiar voice that I say inflection. He said,
Maggie's also getting great data on how fluent are her kids, right? We don't even know who's fluent and disfluent because students don't get tested after 2nd or 3rd grade. So she's getting data here.
your aunt has asked me to try and impress upon you and human beings that you are not from one of the that you are the product of several generations breeding.
Atticus paused, watching me locate an elusive red bug on my leg. Gentle breathing.
Maggie's reading is so beautiful here, which is really important. First of all, things got a little slow when the previous student was reading, so she's picking up the story, bringing it to life for students. But she is building for them a mental model of what this book sounds like when it's read aloud. How she's breathing life into the story. This, like having a mental model of how text should sound is really important for students, because what the research says is when you understand how it can be read aloud, and you do that yourself when you read with prosody aloud, that translates into your silent reading voice. So the way that they read to themselves will be much more engaged because Maggie, and much more rich with meaning and meaningful to them because Maggie's building this mental model for them, what text sounds like when read beautifully aloud.
He continued, when I had found and scratched it, and that you should try to live up to your name. Atticus persevered in spite of us. Asked me to tell you, you must try to behave like the little lady and gentleman that you are. She wants to talk to you about the family and what it's meant.
I think it's underlining here. It's just spontaneously annotating the text because they're so engaged.
To Macomb County through the years, so you'll have some idea of who you are, so you might be moved to behave accordingly, he concluded at a gallop. Mel.
Stunned, Jim and I looked at each other, then at Atticus. whose colors seemed to worry him. He did not speak to me. Presently, I picked up a comb from Jim's dresser and ran its teeth along the edge.
Good. I need an irritated Atticus. Who wants it? Ronnie.
Stop that noise, Atticus said. His curtness stung me.
Aaron.
Great. So I'll just pause there. And before I throw it to you, Kyair and Michael, I'd love to hear what you guys saw in the video because I'm sure you saw lots of things that I didn't. I just want to say that I was at a workshop once and we were talking about reading aloud with kids in this way, with teacher reading and students reading aloud. And the teacher said, I would love to do that with my kids, but I'm so afraid that an administrator would come into my room and ask me why I'm not teaching. And I would just say that this is, so much more productive than 45 minutes of, here are the steps to find the main idea. Anyway, Kyair, want to start on what do you see? What's interesting to you there that you actually do spend your life teaching reading? So tell us what you saw there.
Yeah, one, thanks for showing the video, and what was great is something that's and you were saying this right, Doug, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege of working with Meredith and David Lieben on a number of different projects. They've done some personal PD for my school just as a favor, and what's always stuck out to me is really the importance of what you just said and this idea of getting kids to read out loud, building a safe classroom culture where folks feel confident, where they feel comfortable, and they want to contribute to class. And I can go on a whole tangent about knowledge, but nobody wants to have the teacher pass out all these invitations to a really fun party, and then you don't get the invite because you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the background, right? You don't. So for me, it's going to be, you aren't there yet with your skills, and everybody always wants to be included. Maybe we, in our life, God knows I have not been invited to a party, and we feel a little sore because your friends went and they had fun and then they told you about it. And I know we're going to get into this and it's not quite about the video, but what the teacher did was establish the fact that everybody gets invited to this knowledge party. Your fluency, while it matters, doesn't quite matter because it's the fact that you took an academic risk. And I'll just sort of end by saying, don't quote me on this because it can be a little standards crazy at times, but the last time you see the word fluency show up in the Common Core State Standards is in 5th grade. It's RF 5.4, if I got that right. And what I appreciate when I share the standard with my student is that the standard is the bar for excellence. Any Steelers fans out there, the standard is the standard, right? The standard is the standard, a great Tomlin quote. So I like to show my students the standard. Even though we're in 6th grade, I show them the 5th grade standard and explain to them it's the last time fluency shows up. But it's so important because I want you all to feel confident knowing that you can actually self-correct, realize that the word was supposed to be lead, not led, read, not read, or whatever the mix-up might be, and you can still be a fluent reader because it's actually written in that excellence means that your brain is going back and realizing context. You know what, buddy? That's okay. So when a student makes that mix up, I make sure to remind them, actually, Rashad, you're still doing exactly what your brain is supposed to do, and you're fluent. Shout out to you for going back and self-correcting. And I appreciate that while students, might have had some stilted automaticity, they persevered, which is super important, and it was a safe space to persevere.
Before we pass to Michael, there are two things I just love to amplify. There are so many things you said there I'd like to amplify, but the idea of being invited to the party, the students who are most likely to not get invited to the party are the weakest readers, right? And so we have it's so hard, it's stressful to call on them. You don't want them to do poorly. And so the result is the good kids, the good readers get to read and the kids who can't read never do, right? Which I think is devastating. And the power of self-correction, I'm so glad you called that out, because in some of the videos that we have of teachers doing this, the teachers will actually say beautiful self-correction, love that. Or even when they're reading aloud, they will amplify their own mistake and be like, oh, I got that wrong, and we go back and do it again. Message, even the best reader in the room, even the teacher doesn't get it perfect, so now I don't have to. I just think the things you're pointing out about building a psychologically safe environment where reading can happen are really important, and they're all through these videos. Michael, what did you notice there? What was interesting to you?
There were three things that stood out to me. The first is that the kids aren't asked to just be reading the book at home and then coming in to school and taking some quiz on it, right? That the activity in the classroom is the teaching of how to read, instead of just presuming that that's something everybody can do.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I noticed is that all the students were engaged in the activity. that there was not one student who opted out from what was being asked, that they were all, in fact, seemed to be enjoying it. That, as you pointed out at one point, they're all annotating something in common. The students who are called on to read were not, seemingly were not pre-planned ahead of time, and they were all just waiting for what they were assigned to read aloud. But it could have been anybody. They all might have got called on at any moment, and they were all ready to be actively engaged in what they were doing together. And the third thing that stood out to me was they were reading a great book. To Kill a Mockingbird is
Yeah.
an outstanding book. And so these kids, they're getting something which has immense value, and they're getting to participate in that, to participate in the conversation that began way before To Kill a Mockingbird and is going on even in this very classroom about the questions, the profound questions of human nature that are in that book.
And talk about cultural capital, right? Like people will talk about To Kill a Mockingbird to you everywhere you go as an adult. And if you read that book, you're part of the conversation.
Doug, can I ask you a question? Because, and I'll call myself out on this. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I have this voice in my head that says we're not supposed to do what Maggie was doing there.
Yes.
I taught fifth grade, mind you, so it was not high school, and I have no idea if this video was in a heterogeneously or not, classroom. But I got the very strong message that we should not be asking kids to read out loud. We weren't talking about fluency, unless it was in, say, a guided reading group where everybody was more or less at the same level. And
Yeah.
and I think that was obviously bad advice. And the other thing that I'm going to call myself out on is when we did read aloud, when teacher-led read aloud. No video exists of me, thank goodness, doing this, because I'm pretty sure I was doing it terribly now that now that I know better. I'll bet you I stopped constantly to ask comprehension questions and disrupt the
Yeah.
flow.
I mean, I don't know that it's wrong. I mean, I think it's good to stop sometimes and discuss, right? That's important.
She never
But I'm
did.
also thinking about how many questions Maggie doesn't have to ask because the reading is so expressive. And you have to say, like, how does Atticus feel in that moment? Like, stop that noise. You don't have to ask that question because Mel put it into the reading already. So I just think it allows us to be more strategic about when there's a certain number of questions that we don't have to ask because students have answered the question in the way that they read.
Yeah, I made my point inarticulately, which is I think we were encouraged to do read aloud as a comprehension building exercise because kids had access to the text more orally than through their own independent reading level. In other words, we just sort of mixed the point of the lesson.
Yeah. Well, I think what Michael said also about like the randomness of like everyone's going to get a turn. It's a party, you're invited, but you don't know when your turn's going to come up. You can't count the paragraphs ahead and know when. That means you have to be reading along silently, which is really important. It should be someone reading aloud, but also everyone in the room should be reading silently. Do I have time to show one? Can I go to one more slide?
Sure. Then I've got a couple of questions I want to throw at Mike and Kyair.
Great. And I promise to be, I don't want to yammer on too much, but I just want to, I think knowledge is really important and would just love to go back to it for a tiny second if you will forgive me. So I just wanted to make a point about, about how important background knowledge is and like, what do I do about that if I'm a teacher? And I was just thinking about Animal Farm and how my own kids, I gave it to them to read, and they, as my aunt said, they read it with their boots on, which is they barely engaged the historical aspects of the historical fiction because they had no background knowledge on it. So they read, to them, it was a story about talking animals as opposed to a story about the history of totalitarianism. This happens to students all the time because they don't have the background knowledge of what they're reading about. So when we teach a novel, how do you bring it to life through knowledge? We always talk about embedding nonfiction, which is really like, if we spend 30 minutes a day reading the book, we spend 7 minutes a day reading a piece of nonfiction that amplifies or elucidates or extends some piece of knowledge about the book. So in Animal Farm, we would read about the Trotsky-Stalin conflict briefly, like we would have a little article for students to read. But also there's a lot of like animals singing songs together. So we might read an article about the psychological impact of shared songs. And we might talk about, propaganda and how it works. And so all these, connecting the nonfiction to the fiction is a great tool to have students understand more about what they're reading, have more background knowledge so they make more inferences and think more deeply about the text. But also it allows the nonfiction to ride the fiction's coattails in terms of stories being cognitively privileged. Like, we care about stories more because they're meaningful to us. We have to learn to read nonfiction. But if the story about, the psychological impact of shared songs is connected to a story that I care about and have a lot of thoughts about, Animal Farm, suddenly I'm much more interested in that. Suddenly it's more meaningful to me. And so maybe we get some of the cognitive benefits and psychological benefits of reading fiction also to the nonfiction. The fiction makes the nonfiction makes the fiction stronger, and the fiction makes the nonfiction stronger when we read them in synergy in this way. And I just think like this is one of the key tools that teachers could be thinking about to create a more knowledge-rich environment around great books. It's a lot of work. And the last thing I'll say is that is an argument for shared curriculum, which I know is something that you care deeply about. And I will pause there because I've yammered on for long enough. I apologize for going a little over.
All great stuff. Thank you, Doug. Really, really rich material. But that is a good transition. And the I want to transfer from talking about pedagogy to book selection. So for both Mike and Kyair, how do we select books? Which books students should read? What criteria do you use either at Great Hearts, Mike, or Kyair in Baltimore City schools? Great, Kyair, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I know for us, a majority, I'm saying probably 85% of the district uses Wit and Wisdom for our humanities curriculum. So the books that are contained in that curriculum, now these are, Newbery Award-winning books, books that really are going to help, to Doug's point, right? Like, it's about a general theme, right? The books were chosen because they help build knowledge of a really personal theme as far as humanity or literature, and it wasn't chosen because this is a good book for some skill. This is a great book so that students have access to this knowledge for this party, so that when we make this reference, or Doug had, even mentioned this earlier, I occasionally compare myself to Boo Radley, and it's a little funny when folks get the reference and they know what I'm saying about myself, and then sometimes there's crickets like, Kyair, I don't understand why you just compared yourself, and who's Boo Radley. So like that in and of itself, it's like, as the kids would say, we listen and we don't judge. No, I listen and I'm judging a little bit that you don't get my Boo Radley reference. So all that to say, and I'd rather hear Michael's answer on this, but Baltimore City, we have the curriculum because we use Wit and Wisdom. The books that Wit and Wisdom selected, however, I know because I'm also a facilitator for Wit and Wisdom, they were chosen by teachers. They're award-winning books, but they were chosen because they help push the themes of the module. So as a good comparison, I'm thinking about Module 1 in 6th grade, which is what I teach this year. Out of the Dust and Bud Not Buddy, right? These were great books that were chosen because our main characters are a lot like our students. And the essential question to help build knowledge of the Great Depression is about a character or a group of people undergoing tremendous hardship. How do they endure this hardship? And ultimately, how does that hardship lead to some personal growth and transformation? And call me a softie, but what a great essential question for 6th graders who are also coming of age, who are in middle school now, and a lot of things are changing in and around them. It's probably a Spider-Man quote, but I'll leave that be for now.
Michael, how about book selection at Great Hearts?
I'm tempted to quote from Die Hard when the evil character walks into the boardroom and there's the I don't know, those models, and he says, Alexander, it's some fake quote, right, by Alexander, and then he turns to the character next to him. He says, benefits of a classical education. But anyway, one of the points is what Doug said, right, which is benefit of classical education. One of the benefits of classical education is what other people are talking about. There's lots of things which have been said and written before you, and you should know those things. And so one way to answer your question, Robert, is to say, well, you should give kids the books which will help them to be part of the conversation. This conversation about what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to act well, to live well? All the things which come up which would bother one or torment one as a young man or young woman living in this world today, right? Well, those are things which other people have suffered too. and to be part of the conversation means to know how the people of the past have addressed the things which are in the present. So that's one way to answer your question, Robert. Another way to answer it is to think about the students, to say, like, who are these young men and women that we have before us, and where are they in their development and their growth from being young children to being, being sent off into the world to carry on lives of their own. And what is the thing that they need right now that will help them in their growth? So, we give our first graders, we give them the Velveteen Rabbit. It's just a beautiful, lovely story. And we think part of the importance of this story is the character of the rabbit and the character of the loss for the young child. We also think part of the importance of this story is the beautiful art. The experience of the images there reinforces the beauty of the tale itself. And so we think a lot about how the forms, the meanings of the things we're giving the students are going to shape the children's souls, so to speak, to shape their habits, their affections, so that they can have true delight in things which are beautiful, and grow in their wisdom regarding the things which are challenging or difficult as they mature over time. So those are first pass answers to your question, Robert. I could talk lots more about it. This is my main job, actually, is to think about what books we should put in front of children. So
Good. I think one of the reasons I became a curriculum advocate was because of his absence in my own career trajectory. I was that teacher who was handed the keys and told, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what your students need, and that was not good advice. So I'm curious. One should not assume that one's personal experience is universal, but it's interesting to me that both at Great Hearts and with Wit and Wisdom in Baltimore, there's less teacher choice. So I'd love to hear a similar answer for those of us who don't have what I would consider the benefits of a structured curriculum. And toward that end, one of the other bits of advice I got as a new teacher was oh, look, classic books, those are boring for kids. They don't help develop a love of reading. The books you choose should be about them, about their interests, about their lives. How valid of a concern is that?
I'll jump in, and then Kyair can respond as well. The main thing that I think we need to address when we're presenting books to students is not that it fits in with the ephemera of the moment. Something happens on TikTok or whatever, right? It does need to speak to their soul, though. It needs to speak to their fundamental concerns about being a human. And so Kyair was talking about the value of Bud Not Buddy for the kids that he's got in his classroom and how that speaks to them. I think this is true in To Kill a Mockingbird, right? You got a young child, her father is going through something difficult. She's sort of trying to understand the adult world. Lots of our kids have that experience, trying to understand the adult world. So it's not that it shouldn't speak to them, but we need to avoid the temptation to think that what that means is it's got cultural cachet right now, right? Like the being human has been, the issues which concern humanity have gone back for thousands and thousands of years, and they can connect to Achilles and the feeling of betrayal and honor in the Iliad. And they can connect to the sense of desperation in night, right? Like these things speak to fundamental things about human nature.
What I hear you say, Michael, is that it's not the author's job to be relevant. It's our job to explain why it's relevant.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, right? That we have to bring the students into it. We have to. Doug talked about bringing in the other historical elements that will give them the knowledge necessary to find purchase in the books, right? To help them to see that this is a fundamental human question, and that they need to be able to engage in that question as well.
Kyair, you want to have a bash at that about the relevant text argument?
Yeah, it's funny because I was gonna add on to my first answer in that while we do have our Wit and Wisdom books in Baltimore City, what's fascinating is that honors in 8th grade actually gets to choose from text, I believe, in the 9th grade curriculum, and in Baltimore, teachers have a choice. I think it's maybe EL, but I know for sure the other one is Odell. So schools can choose whether or not they want to use Odell education for their curriculum for humanities or literacy, and then some other curriculum. What I do know is that most have chosen Odell, and what's fascinating is that we had a really deep conversation Do we expose students in our honors 8th grade class to Romeo and Juliet, or do we choose to read the Book of Unknown Americans? And as I was talking with our dean of academics, I actually was really pushing our dean that we needed to read the Book of Unknown Americans. Not that I didn't want them to have, to block them from the knowledge access that you get from Shakespeare, but rather this idea that A, they're going to be exposed to it when they get to high school. So a double exposure, while not bad, I really wanted to prioritize a book from an author who maybe is less known, and that was a choice that we made. But it was a really good dialogue to have. The other thing I would say that Michael hit on really is like, if we're just being honest, and we're going to peel back those onion layers as Shrek might, is, let's just keep it 100, right? The school that I'm at, I have mostly all black students. 98% of our school, black African American, right? I teach 6th graders whose reading levels are all over the place and vary. But what I do know is that if somebody were to say, Kyair, why would you teach Out of the Dust? Like, how do your kids have anything in common with Billy Joe, a white girl, 13 years old from Depression era Oklahoma, 1929, right, early 1930s? Well, beyond whether or not Billy Joe is white, she is a girl, she is, and my kids are black, they are. It's this idea that very early in the book, Billy Joe feels really guilty because she loses her mom and her baby brother Franklin, right? Her father is a drunk and not really in her life. And to Michael's point, I think that this is where it's really important. It's about how we use the book and how we make these connections, how we talk about loss, how we talk about grief, how we talk about the human condition, the human experience, our very existence, right? Our somebodiness, to quote a speech from King, right? And these really make the books far more poignant. Now, it's important to read the entire book because when you do read the entire book, you realize that Billy Joe transforms because of the hardships that she's had to endure. The idea that her father comes back into her life and is more present both physically and mentally, right? The idea that Bud also finds something that he's been looking for so long. And a lot of us are also, even at 36 or older, are also still looking for things. But we only know that, as Doug alluded to earlier, when we read the entire book and there's the payoff. One of the hardest decisions that I made this year, and I say somewhat tongue in cheek, and I go back and forth every year, do I do a read aloud and have students help me with the reading? I believe it's chapter 17 or 18 of Bud Not Buddy when he finally discovers that Hermione Calloway is in fact his granddad. Or do I have kids read it on their own and secretly stand in the back of the classroom and watch the audible gasps when they realize who Hermione Calloway is? Selfishly this year, I decided to do the reading with students, but it's regardless, it's one of the best moments in the classroom when students have that aha moment and it's just like, whoa. It's a great conflict I have with myself. That's why we have to read the whole book. That's why the themes matter. That's why Bud's endurance, his survival matters. Because we're all survivors in some way or form.
Doug, you wanted to make a couple of quick points about book choice.
I just wanted to double click on something that Kyair said, which is he said it's a choice that we made. And I think that when I was an English teacher, I wanted to choose the books because I loved them. And of course, teachers, the more you love books, the more you want that. But I think it's really important that groups of people choose books, in part because one of the things that we do when we teach reading is we compare books and we talk about intertextuality, and you talk about, like Bud is an orphan, and we should be able to talk about how is his experience of orphanhood similar to different from this other book. Or we read a dystopian book and we should be able to say, how is Lois Lowry's portrayal of dystopian society similar to or different from the way that dystopia was described in Red Scarf Girl? Think how many books are there that a teacher can assume that all of her students have read so that she can make intertextual comparisons and discussions. There's almost no book that you can presume unless the school decides as a team, like it could be you're the 6th-grade English teacher and you get to choose 3 books, but there are 3 books that we're all going to teach so that the 7th-grade teachers can talk about them and we can connect things. I just think that it's easy to overlook how important some sort of what you might describe as like an internal canon of just like, we have selected books that we're all going to read so we can all talk about them is. And the other thing I would just put in a tiny plug for is I love YA fiction. It's beautiful. But one of the things that happens to kids is if they've never read a book, that's really challenging, that pushes them, that's difficult, then when they get to college and someone puts the Fairy Queen or Faulkner or the United States Constitution in front of them, they're dead, right? Because one of the downside of youth fiction is it's written for youth. It's made to be accessible and easy to, and there should be lots of experiences reading books that instantly light your mind on fire. But students should also practice struggling with books that are both hard and beautiful and ultimately reward the struggle.
I remember, Doug, you listening to you years ago talking about archaic language and the need to get that in front of kids, and that has always stuck with me. I think so. Thank you for making that point. You know, at the outset, you also made the point that, and you're right, that you're preaching to the choir somewhat. Nobody here is arguing against books, so I will invoke the moderator's privilege and play devil's advocate, not to be anti-books, but to ask about the role of shorter texts in classrooms. We could unpack at deathless length how we evolved to that point. But I think it's fair to say that we do tend to overcorrect. So while it's terrific that we're taking books seriously again, it wouldn't surprise me at all if suddenly we no longer do shorter texts. It's only whole books. So what is the proper role, if any, for shorter texts and excerpts within your ELA curriculum? For all three of you. No one's eager to throw themselves on the grenade. Really.
Well, I had just finished talking, so I was just trying to abide by share the mic. I was thinking really, and again, this is going to sound like I'm trying to champion wit and wisdom. I think there are a lot of great knowledge building curricula out there. Obviously, I really love this one personally. When we're reading, Bud Not Buddy, we have our complementary, right? We have our anchor text, Bud Not Buddy, and Out of the Dust, but we also have some complementary or supplementary texts that help build knowledge as part of the volume of reading. Again, curious to hear what Michael and Doug say, but I do think that, no pun intended, I'm anchored in the core text and our anchor text and why we read them and why we're going to read all of it. I do think that it's also important, however, to build that background knowledge so that students have access, right? That they feel comfortable and confident to take academic risks. So all that to say, yeah, a brief article about what was the Great Depression, a YouTube video that kind of does it in a fun kind of kitschy rap that the kids really enjoy so that we have the basics so they can access some of the terms, some of the references. It's going to be really helpful. But again, it's sort of like that that image that Doug had showed, right, within Animal Farm, right? You're still reading that core text, but there is a place to take an off-ramp from the highway, right? A little pit stop, right, at the corner store, whatever, the gas station, and then you get right back onto the highway and you're right back in Animal Farm. And I think that, to me, really works with any text.
Okay. So short texts, when they build background knowledge, any other use for short text in our classrooms?
What I think, Robert, when you ask this question is, what is the form? What is unique about the form and how does it communicate meaning? So I was thinking about the quote Doug had from Marshall McLuhan, "The medium is the message." I think these forms, the text length is part of the form which communicates meaning. And we want to educate students in how those forms work. So a short nonfiction passage, so let's say an essay of Montaigne, right? When we read that with the students, we want the students to be thinking about, what does Montaigne think an essay is? What is he trying to do in the form that he's chosen to communicate? If we read a short story by Flannery O'Connor, let's say, we want to work with the students to understand how that short story form communicates meaning as in contrast to the novel form. Like, what is the novel form doing and how is the short story form different? And does that change how you should read it? So I would answer your question, Robert, with respect to the intrinsic purposes of the form itself, that we want students to understand how these forms function and what the choice of form communicates about the author's intention and what they want to teach us. So I wouldn't just force short passage things for skills practice, let's say. I mean, with some exceptions, like we do have to build skills, right? So I don't want to deny that, but I would really, as much as possible, want to do that, preserving the integrity of the text itself, so that students are seeing that text as having integrity and that form as communicating meaning.
I'm going to go to audience questions in just a few, but let me get a real quick whip around answer to this question. The role of in-class reading versus assigned reading at home. How do you handle that? Is there still, because I mean the standard critique is, well, if I assign it, they're not going to read it, or they're going to use, ChatGPT or Spark Notes or some such.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to steal Doug's answer. I feel like you had said this with the video, and one of the decisions I make is knowing my students. The fact that Doug had brought up this idea of capital, and I think when I was in grad school and teaching a similar class, maybe it was Sarah Yoso. I'm probably misquoting the article, but it was whose culture has capital. And I think it's really important to understand what our kids bring into the classroom with us to obviously capitalize on that, and it behooves us to do so. I think that given the school context that I'm in personally, I prefer doing the reading in class. I don't want to inadvertently shame a student. I don't want to set up a precedent where you're shamed or othered or excluded because you didn't do X, Y, and Z at home. There maybe isn't somebody at home to support you who also has the reading. And again, something else that's also stuck with me, I think, from the Liebens has also been, this whole idea of sustained silent reading really also excludes students who aren't able to do that at their independent level. So there's a lot of considerations: the instructional level of a student, the independent level of student, the access to the books at home, who's at home to be able to help or assist. So all that to say, all of the reading for me is done in the classroom, and it's part of our process, it's part of our routine, but it's also part of the beauty.
Yeah, the reading in the classroom, I think, serves two purposes. The first is what Doug, I think, spoke so beautifully about, which is it helps to build fluency in the students so that they can actually hear what the words should sound like when they're read to them, and they can practice reading themselves. And what did you say, Doug? You fire the way you, I forget what you said. You,
Where are you fire?
yeah, you're wired how you fire. Yeah. So, and so I think that's really important. We use in-class reading, especially in the younger years, precisely for that purpose. I also think we're wanting to teach the students to read independently and to read a lot. And so by the time you're in our ninth grade class, there's very little in-class reading, except with Shakespeare. We always read Shakespeare in class because it's very hard. Or maybe with Billy Budd or other things when they've got a particularly difficult passage. But there's a lot of reading they have to do at home. Robert, you asked, how do we hold them accountable to that? We do daily reading quizzes. It's every day they're assessed on it's very simple, just facts like who did this or what time period did this happen, or very things like that. But all that sits in a culture which makes that sort of thing possible, right? I noted when Doug played his video how everybody in that classroom is 100% engaged in that work. Like that's the prerequisite which makes it work. And similarly with reading at home, the prerequisite to making reading at home work is the culture of reading, where everybody expects to be held accountable, to be part of the conversation the next day. So that's a long answer to what you wanted a short answer for. But
Doug, thoughts on independent reading at home?
With my esteemed colleagues.
Well, sorry, I think I missed you there.
I don't think I can improve on the. I think that I can improve on the remarks of my esteemed colleagues.
Okay, let's grab a couple of quick audience questions before we call it an afternoon. Audience question for Doug: which is the better way to read a book with students? Read the book straight through once and then go back for close reading and analysis, or close read and analyze as you go along with the reading?
Will you take it depends? I mean, I think right. It depends on the text and where you are. And I think it depends, and students should experience both.
And by the way, if I may, the question continues. Students have told me they get frustrated with the stop and start of the second approach.
Yeah. I mean, I do love a contiguous read of an extended section of text where the story comes to life, and I'm lost in it. I think that like flow state, when you lose track of time doing a task, is one of the most pleasurable states for a human being, and reading is one of the best ways to get into a flow state. But then we also need to go back and look. There are some lines that are very, very important. So I love reading through a book and then going back and choosing a line or two for deep analysis. I especially like I'll do like a couple of bars on close reading because I think it's something that I really care deeply about. I think it's really interesting to reread very small sections of text, just a couple of lines. I think they should always be projected to students. So as they come to refine and increase their understanding of the lines, they can constantly refresh their working memory of the text and look at it and think about it and reread it again to themselves. So I choose a couple lines, I project them on the board. And one of my favorite techniques for close reading is to take a sentence from a text. Let's say there's a line in right at the beginning of Lord of the Flies when the boys are stranded on the desert island without adults and they try to recreate society to disastrous consequences. And Ralph, who's one of the main characters, rips off his clothes tears off his shirt and kicks off his shoes fiercely. And like in the language choices of Golding, there is like hidden the savagery beneath the surface of the boys. I like to rewrite that sentence and take out the really charged language and say he removed his clothes. He took off his shirt eagerly instead of fiercely, and put those two sentences right next to each other and ask students to compare them. How's it different when this single word is changed? How is the meaning altered? To cause them to, I just think there's a lot of really fascinating cognitive science research on the idea that when people compare two concrete examples of something, they're more able to have insights than when they just abstract. They're like, what is Golding trying to accomplish in this sentence? Yep. I don't think I really answered the question. I think continuity matters. I think story matters, and I think deep analysis and close reading matters, like your ability to construct meaning from a very difficult piece of text. So the question is already won because it's suggested doing both. I think the answer depends, but I especially I like to read first and then go back personally, but I'm not sure that's the only way to do it.
And another question here that we sort of touched on this, it's about student motivation. Regardless of how good a book is, many students find that being assigned the book makes the experience of reading it much less enjoyable. Without challenging the premise of the question, can this problem be avoided or mitigated?
The purpose of school is to cause young people to do things they wouldn't otherwise have the self-discipline to do. I mean, every great book that I've read, I read because someone made me, and in the end, I was so grateful that they made me read it. I know there's more to it than that, but that's just to play the grudge.
It's a pretty good answer, actually. Kyair, Michael, you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it for me is also a little about setup and mindset. I always approach books with a get to, not a have to. So it's, hey, you know what? This year we get to read Out of the Dust and Bud Not Buddy, and these are incredible. I try to movie trailerify them, if I can make that a whole thing, right? Where I love a good book tasting. Our librarian, who's a master and dean of books, Miss Johnson, does an amazing job doing book tastings with kids. But I really just want to get kids excited. So when I talk about Bud's story, his journey, it's pumping up the adventure, this idea that he's lost his way and we need to find it, and we're all going to kind of become sleuths with Bud. And can you keep track of all the clues? So there's always, some kind of gimmicky incentive for me. But again, by the end of the book, kids don't actually remember that I incentivized. Can they keep track of the clues? It's, oh my God, I figured it out. And that somehow is the prize itself. So again, I understand what the questioner is asking. I think that it's how the teacher sets it up. Michael also said it. In my classroom, it's a culture of we get to read today. And isn't that special?
Yeah, there was a similar question. Maybe we can touch on it briefly. Very nice effect there, Doug. That some have suggested that the books assigned in school tend to interest girls more than boys. Are there certain kinds of books that you think are better suited to boys, or is that just not part of the calculus in book choice?
In my experience of my own children, that's true. My girls read different books than my boys do. I think the key question for me is it age appropriate, and is it about a profound aspect of human existence, which I want them to wrestle with. And then after that, we can think about, well, is the main character a boy, is the main character a girl, or other things that might be relevant to who's finding it more attractive than others. But the first question for me is like, you know, is it a question of betrayal? Is it, what are the human things at the core of this conversation? And is this where I want to be spending my precious time that I have with these students in conversation?
Well, I speak as a former fifth grade teacher. I will confess that I do remember choosing Hatchet for read aloud specifically to appeal to boys because we had just done Bridge to Terabithia before then. So I've made those decisions myself. Um, Here's a great question. Timothy Shanahan, who I assume you all know, but for those who don't know his name, he's a very, very well-regarded reading expert and researcher based at the University of Illinois, I believe. He wrote a blog post last year, and I'll quote here. The idea that teaching reading with excerpts harms kids or limits their learning in any significant manner is a claim made without evidence. Is Shanahan wrong?
I love Tim Shanahan and admire him deeply and have learned so much from him,
Same.
and I disagree.
Okay. Yeah, I wish he were here to refresh my memory of that piece that may have been based on the skill of reading and standardized tests and
I
whatnot.
think, I think if you can't read a book and haven't had the experience of reading a great book, I mean, when you look at the reading rates of kids outside of school and the battle against the cell phone, for many kids, many very bright kids, the books that they read and the things that they read in school will be the only things that they read. And do I think books matter? Do I think am I grateful for the books that my own kids have read that I had to read? That's not, I mean, I think I presented some data for books at the beginning of the call, but like what I'm describing now isn't in like, that's not data, it's personal experience, but it's profound personal experience that if I had to choose a school for my own children and one school said, we're going to read only short pieces and one school said, we're going to read books, there's no doubt in my mind which school I'm sending my child to.
Yeah, I mean the point may be, we could talk at length about the I'll say it, the damage that has been done to reading based on the impetus of or the need to prepare for standardized tests has kind of incentivized a lot of these practices. I assume that's Shanahan's point. In other words, you're not going to see this show up in scores, but for all the reasons that you were very eloquent about, Doug, I'm with you. Apropos of fluency, here's a really interesting question. What are your opinions on having students read along with the audiobook in class? A professional actor might do a better job giving students a sense of the tone and syntax, but is it a lost opportunity for students to develop their own fluency? I mean, that woman, Maggie at Troy, did a very nice job of reading, but on the other hand, we listened to all the Harry Potter books, on audio tape with Jim Dale, and he did, and he's Jim Dale, and he did a hell of a job.
Well, what's funny is I will say that I really truly got this question for what it's worth. The student's name was Sire, and he said, Mr. K, why do you choose to read like that? And it was a fun, teachable moment to say, one, it's more engaging when I read with voices. I sort of distinguish between a character speaking and do various character voices, much to the chagrin of, I'm sure, any British counterpart for Blood on the River, and for the narrator. I think it's more fun for students. Now, is it true that there's probably a voice actor out there, the author, whoever, who can probably do a better job than me? Yeah, but I'm not going to lie. I'm still not meant to be a humble brag. I'm still the most fluent person in the room, and it's still important for students to hear me. Now, are there times when I personally do some small group instruction that following along with the captions and still trying to follow along in your book, is an accommodation that is provided? Yeah, but that is in the minority, that is in the small faction, right, that I give students. I still want to prioritize students having the opportunity to do buddy reading or follow along with me, and to Doug's point, going back after we've had a chance to read it so they understand how it should be read. So I'm not going to say that there's never a chance or an opportunity that you shouldn't follow along with the video. Because, I'm sure that there are other actors out there. I don't have an Oscar. I don't have the EGOT. Damned as I might, I'm trying to. Okay, folks?
Do we have any evidence? Does audio listening to a competent reader who's not your teacher, does that build fluency? I don't know the answer to that question.
I think you have to read to develop fluency. And so one of the great things about a human reading too is the human can pause and say, Michael, pick up, like your turn.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about the point that Kyair made earlier in the call when he said how important, you were talking about how important it is to like create psychological safety, and to like, it's actually really important for the narrator for the teacher to make tiny mistakes and be like, whoops, I didn't quite get that. Let me go back and do that again. Like, I love audiobooks and I have no beef with them. But I think as a teaching tool, it's really important to have your teacher do that and model the experience and be like, oh, I think I can read that better. Or, oh, I stumbled on it. Let me take that again. Or to, all the things that you do to make the connection to the text more real, just by being responsive to the experience that kids are having, by pausing when kids have an emotional response, like, wow, felt that too. Robert, pick up.
Yeah. Speaking of Robert Pickup, we are at time, but Doug, I want you to really briefly touch on the last audience question here, because I think it's essential here about building students' vocabulary through teaching books. I've listened to you in the past talking about scaffolding vocabulary. Can you just say a few words in closing about vocabulary within this context?
I think there are two categories of vocabulary that we should teach. One is explicit vocabulary, words that we should choose and introduce to students, give them a definition, let them play with the word in multiple ways, develop a rich understanding of the word. We should do that. If we did that with 2 or 3 words a day, we would never close the vocabulary gap. And so the second thing, and I think the second reason to have students read aloud is most of the hard words that you experience in your life, you will learn from text, and you will only experience them from text. There's so many words that the word forte, is that fort or forte? I'm not sure. The reason that I can't pronounce it is because I've only seen it reading, right? And many of the hard words we only experience in reading. So I think one of the things that a teacher has to do, and one of the reasons to read aloud, is I have to cause students to pay more attention, to be more attentive to new words as they read them. So if we're reading it and we come across the word forte, and I say that word is fort, everyone's fort, like just by causing you to say it aloud, I draw your attention to it. You're more attentive to it. You're more likely to remember it. If you can pronounce it, you're not going to skip it. When you're reading it, you've begun orthographically mapping it. So I just think one of the hidden skills of teaching is, as we're reading aloud, drawing students' attention to words more intentionally, so they notice more and learn more from the words that they come across in the course of the reading.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll close with this. Teaching whole books is not just about literacy. It's about whether students develop the ability to sustain attention, follow complex ideas, and enter into a shared intellectual world. That's not just an academic school or an academic skill. That's a cultural and life skill. Thank you so much to our panelists, to Kyair Butts, to Michael Austin, and to Doug Lemov. This has been a terrific, rich hour and 15 minutes, and I wish we had double the time, and we will have to continue this conversation at another time. And to our audience, thank you very much, and we'll see you again next month.